And this video is going to be sponsored by Riousx gaming chairs. Get 10% off your own chair with the code Curios. I've personally been using their chair myself, and it's been an awesome improvement from the previous brand of gaming chair that I had before. Check them out at riousx.io or at the link in the description. What's up guys, it's me Jeremy. So the mean streets of Gadgetzan is in pretty much full swing so far, and although it's actually a really diverse standard format so far, there's definitely a lot of decks that have been coming out on top. You know, the aggro pirate archetype is obviously really powerful and pretty much dominating the meta so far, primarily in warrior and shaman versions. Reno Lock as well is stronger than ever, and both Jade Druid and Aviana combo druids are pretty popular at high ranks on ladder 2. Although a lot of other decks are viable as well, a lot of them are generally considered to be a little bit weaker or at least less consistent than some of the more powerful decks that we just mentioned, and so those decks kind of need all the help that they can get. Not to worry though, when certain decks become too strong, you can definitely metagame against them by teching in certain cards or even playing completely different strategies just to beat them. And so today we're doing our best to talk about some of these strategies and tech cards, as well as their benefits and drawbacks, in order to hopefully help some of you guys counter the mean streets of Gadgetzan meta. So let's get right into it. So let's start by covering some of the things that you can do against aggro pirate warrior and aggro shaman first, since they're probably some of the more popular decks on ladder, and they're also a lot easier to tech against too. So first of all, these decks really rely a lot on weapons for both synergy and damage, and they also play some really high value weapons too, like Arcanite Reaper, you got some Doom Hammers, a lot of stuff in the early game too, you know, you got upgrades and stuff that can make some really big stuff. And of course, this means that all weapon destruction is going to be really powerful against them, and can also be pretty decent against other decks too, like maybe Riousx if you happen to face it, or like some rogue decks or something like that. You know, Acidic Swamp Ooze, definitely going to be the best option as far as weapon destruction goes, since it's really cheap, fully deals with the annoying weapons, and fits great into all sorts of decks. You know, if you're playing an aggro deck, it's an aggressive enough body where putting it into your deck doesn't really hurt you all that much, and if you're playing more of like a controlling or a mid-range deck, the cheap mana cost helps you develop it against an aggressive deck while also still being able to, you know, cast a removal spell or a heal on the same turn. Harrison Jones, potentially the next best option, but you probably want to run 2 Acidic Swamp Oozes before Harrison in this meta right now actually, since generally Harrison Jones is really just way too slow against all of these aggressive decks, even though the card draw is a lot nicer. Now, one interesting option is if you're trying to tech against pirate decks, but you're actually playing a pirate deck yourself, is you can potentially tech in a Bloodsail Corsair, because the thing is that he enables your pirate synergies, because he's a pirate himself, and he can also destroy opponents' weapons. But in general, I gotta say, at least right now, especially with all the upgrades and stuff going around where people buff the durability on their weapons, he's probably still slightly worse than Ooze right now, but potentially a really cool and definitely unexpected thing to try out for sure. Now obviously any taunts or heals are going to be great against these aggressive decks, and there's a ton of those, so we can't really cover all of them, but one thing that you could definitely take a look at to potentially include in your deck is Dirty Rat. So the awesome thing about Dirty Rat is against things like Pirate Warrior is that you can usually just slam it down on turn 2, get a pretty big taunt, and your opponent's either going to get a really small minion or potentially no minion at all. You might even get lucky, potentially pull something like a Finley or maybe a N'Zoth's First Mate so that they lose out on a lot of value, and that puts you really far ahead. The other really cool thing about Dirty Rat is that it's actually pretty solid against a lot of different decks too. You know, you definitely don't want to be slamming it on turn 2 against control or mid-range decks, but once you're at a decent amount of mana, maybe have some backup removal on hand, just in case you pull something crazy, it could definitely be worth the risk. You know, even the meta for slower decks right now is based on a lot of really powerful battle cry effects, like Reno Jackson, you got Riousx, Kazakus, anything in Jade Druid really, or a lot of the combo pieces like Kun or Leroy or Faceless, and potentially by pulling one of those cards onto the board with Dirty Rat, you can sometimes just win the game completely by destroying your opponent's combo, or at least like very significantly hurt their combo and really cripple the opponent's win condition. It's rare to see a tech card that's good against multiple decks, so if you're playing against a variety of different stuff, it could potentially be better for you to slot in some Dirty Rats, or at least mix up your Ooze to Dirty Rat ratio, but if pretty much all you're seeing is pirate decks, then Ooze is definitely going to be the better tech card overall. One other thing people could potentially do against Pirate Warrior is to play a really early game focused Control Warrior with lots of armor. So this deck is a potential good option to counter the meta with, since you can actually also beat a lot of combo decks, since you really just armor enough to where the combo doesn't ever kill you. And you can even sometimes beat Riousx by playing Harrison to get the Riousx weapon, or maybe Grom with an activator to burst them down when they're not careful with like an Alexstrasza or something like that. I guess the problem with this deck is that any competent Jade Druid player has a really solid matchup against you, so you just have to feel out the meta and see if a lot of people are playing Jade Druid or not. You can definitely try to combo your opponent's Jade Druid with a Grom and an Alexstrasza, but it would definitely be a very tough matchup to win in the first place. Still though, if you're not seeing Jade Druid on the ladder, some variation of Control Warrior is going to be a really strong option to play. Next, let's take a look at what we can do against Jade Druid decks, since it's actually pretty simple really. So playing against Jade Druid is actually a little bit like playing solitaire almost. So of course your opponent's decisions matter, they can definitely interact with you with things like removal and stuff, but there's usually just an average turn where they essentially just reach a critical mass or like a size of Jade Golems that's a little bit too big for you and you just lose. Now there's nothing you can really do to invalidate or control the Golems, since Jade Idol essentially lets them have infinite Golems, so essentially what you need to do is really just to race them. Now there's pretty much two ways of going about this. So one way is to just play a really aggressive deck, since even with tech cards, Jade Druid struggles pretty hard against aggro decks. The other is to maybe just play a combo deck with board wipes and removal, and stall long enough so that you can combo them before their golems kill you. Now that's pretty much what Riousx does, or at least tries to do in this matchup. The problem with combo decks like Aviana and Kun against Jade Druid is that you don't necessarily have any like really effective board wipes like Twisting Nether and stuff, so it can be a lot more difficult to stall against a bunch of massive golems while you try to get your combo pieces. Still, the thing is that there aren't actually really any specific cards to slot in against Jade Druid, so if you're seeing more of it than anything else, we definitely recommend either playing some variant of aggro, or perhaps Riousx, with aggro definitely having a stronger matchup, but maybe with Riousx having more balanced matchups across the board. And of course, if we're talking about countering the meta, we gotta talk about cards that you can tech against Riousx. So one of the cool things about Riousx in this meta is really that it honestly has pretty solid matchups just across the board. However, there's definitely still cards that you can tech to try to beat them. Now, one really interesting, kind of silly card that you can tech into play is actually Sacrificial Pact. Now, of course you need to be playing Warlock, but you can definitely slot it into your own Reno deck, and not only does it just instantly win you the game for free if you're playing a mirror and your opponent ever casts Riousx, but it also potentially lets you eat your own demons like Imps from Imp Gang Boss against aggressive decks, maybe if you're just trying to gain that 5 health. Now, of course, Sacrificial Pact definitely will end up being dead in some matchups, but if you're seeing just a ton of Riousx on ladder, you're confident enough you can maybe play around Leroy Faceless and beta Riousx from them, it's going to be a great card for you to include. Beyond that, you generally want to include a fair amount of burst damage so that you can beat a Riousx, since Riousx has just a really powerful late game. Now, Jade Druid is probably one of the only decks that actually has a better late game than Riousx, so against them you might want to slot in a few extra taunts like Ancient of War, since they're primarily going to win games against you with Leroy Faceless combos. Ancient of War is potentially actually pretty good against aggro decks too, as long as you can get it out fairly early with Innervate or other acceleration. Now, as far as actual decks go, something like Aviana Kun Druid combo is pretty good against Riousx. You can Feral Rage your way out of Leroy combo lethal range, you can generally get your combo faster than them, and you have a pretty insane burst combo that kills them even at full health, so the Reno Jackson doesn't actually matter at all. Either way though, those are some of the tech cards we recommend slotting into the current meta. Definitely let us know which tech cards you guys like to use on the ladder right now in the comment section below. Either way, looks like that's gonna be it from me. If you guys enjoyed the video, drop a like, subscribe if you want. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.